Welcome to the Business of Apparel podcast. This is the place to learn how to start and scale your own apparel brand and fill it with loyal customers for years to come. I'm your host, Rachel Erickson, owner and CEO of Unmarked Street, and I can't wait to share this episode with you. Welcome back to the Business of Apparel podcast, where today I'm going to start with a little bit of an apology to you because one of the biggest questions that I get asked here at the Business of Apparel is about minimum order quantities, or what we call MOQs. And I've never done an episode on MOQs. So we talk about this a lot when we talk about sourcing. I feel like I mention MOQs quite a bit across the board. We have big, long discussions about minimum order quantities when I'm hosting free workshops or when we're in our annual membership community. But I can't believe I haven't done a podcast episode on it today. So today we are just going to dive deep on MOQs, or minimum order quantities, and everything that you need to know about it as you're starting your apparel brand. Now, when I recommend to my clients as they're starting to interview new manufacturers or going out and trying to find a factory that they want to use to produce their goods, the number one question that I encourage them to ask that factory is, what are your MOQs? What are your minimum order quantities? And then the backup question to that is, what are your MCQs? What are your minimum color quantities? And the answers to these two questions are basically going to give you, I don't know, I don't have a percentage on this for real, but it's probably going to give you half of the information that you need to know on whether or not you're going to be able to work with this factory. Now, of course, there are other factors, and I think next week we're going to do a special on sourcing. So let's talk about all of those other factors next week. So stay tuned for that. Today, there is enough information just about MOQs, and so I just want to cover this one topic for today. We'll talk about more next week because it is so important. So when you come in, let's say, to the Business of Apparel annual membership, we're calling it the board. We really want you to be able to kind of bring on this board of advisors, your C-suite, in me and my team. We want you to have access to the most elite, most current, most modern, most professional advice that you can possibly get without having to go hire a CEO or a COO or even put us on monthly retainer. We want you to have easy access to us for years and years at a really, really low, completely manageable cost, right? So when you work with us inside our annual membership, the first few months that you're spending with us are learning all about the basics of the apparel industry. And now you might be a brand that's been established for a little while, but what we're teaching in those first few months is essentially what the biggest billion-dollar brands are out there doing. And so from our experience working for Abercrombie & Fitch, Fossil, Specialized, Meyer, Disney, big billion-dollar brands like that, we're distilling that information down into what you need to know as a startup so that you can aspire to get to that level someday, right? We want you to know what the groundwork is that you need to lay so that you can get there. And when we do that, we talk a lot about budgeting. So there's a lot that we encourage you to do in the way of budgeting up front for your brand. So for example, when you're building your business plan, almost half of your business plan is all about financial projections. And what do you think you're going to need to start your company? What do you think you're going to be able to make in the way of sales? What do you think you're going to be spending on team and on inventory and all of those kinds of things? And we're putting all of those resources together for you so that you have as much information at your fingertips as you can. But then there's some work that you obviously need to do on your own because every brand is a little bit unique. And when we go into the budgeting scenario and we work in our worksheets and our spreadsheets and all of that fun stuff that we've created for you to be able to determine your budget and your best financial plan, what we end up talking a lot about is minimum order quantities. And the reason being that depending on how many units of anything you are required to buy from your factory is going to really affect your bottom line, especially as you're starting out. So essentially, what is an MOQ? It's the minimum amount that a factory is going to ask you to buy from them for you to have a partnership with them and for them to agree to start working with you. So for example, when we work with some of our more amenable factories, whether they be in the US or overseas, we'll see anywhere from about 200 to 500 units being an MOQ. Now, this is pretty low. This is a very generous MOQ. If you can get into somewhere that has lower than 200 units, you might be striking it rich. You might have hit the jackpot, but you also might be setting yourself up for a little bit of quality control issues because, and I'll get into this a little bit more too, the more that a factory can produce for you, the better your quality is going to be. So I'll get there in a minute. But let's keep talking about what is an MOQ, right? So for them to be able to say, yeah, we'll sign up to work with you as a brand. We will develop your goods. We'll start making prototypes. We will bring in your trims. We will bring in your fabrics. We'll store all of that for you. We will assign a team to work on costing for you. We will assign sewers to sew your garments for you. For them to basically raise their hand and say, we're willing to spend our resources to set up this partnership and work for you, you need to promise us that you're going to buy at least 200 to 500 units. Now, they're going to give you a specific number. They're not going to say 200 to 500. Some factories will say your minimum order quantity is 200 units. Other ones will say it's 500 units. There are big factories that will say your minimum order quantity is 3,000 units. And so you can see how this can really affect your bottom line. And when we start to crunch numbers inside our membership with our different clients, and they start to see how these numbers affect them, like we're in this live spreadsheet, we've got our costs, we've got it all rolled up, we're adding our tariffs, we're adding our duty fees, we have a final landed cost. This is what this unit is going to actually cost me to bring it into the US, put it into my warehouse and sell it to somebody, right? This is my final cost. Once we compare that then to our retail price, so here's my cost, here's what I'm going to sell it for. And now I'm starting to see a profit margin, right? I'm starting to see how much I'm going to make. I'm starting to see what that margin percentage is, which is another really important factor that you should be looking at all the time. Once you start to see that, you can then add in your minimum order quantities into your spreadsheet and start to see how much money you're going to owe upfront to purchase that inventory. So for example, let's say it costs you $10 per unit to order that item. You need to order 500 of them. So your first purchase order is going to be $5,000. Now you can sell it for a great profit margin so that your profits come back and they're really good. And then you can pump all of that money into hiring team, into buying more equipment, into buying your next purchase order of inventory. And so that's how we really want you to perpetuate your finances. And that's the kind of budget stuff that we'll work on with you. But what I want you to understand is that if you didn't have to put 500 in that column, let's say you only had to put 200 in that column, now your first purchase order is only $2,000. And maybe that's a much easier number to stomach when you're trying to save money, you're trying to build from scratch, you don't have profits coming in yet, you don't have sales going yet. You can potentially talk about pre-sales and maybe you're doing something there, or maybe you have a side hustle, or maybe you have a full-time gig. And so you're able to siphon off a little bit of money every single month and you're saving. That's a great way to start your brand, but are you able to afford that upfront number? And so the more that you can play with your minimum order quantity and know exactly what you need that number to be able to afford your first PO, and then move yourself into profitability can be very, very crucial. And so let's say you've done your whole budget. You've gotten to a place where you're like, you know what? I can totally afford a 500 unit MOQ. So now I'm going out and I'm interviewing factories. And again, that first question that you're going to ask them, what are your minimum order quantities and what are your minimum color quantities, is do they answer the way that you need them to? Are you sick of being stuck on the sidelines of the apparel industry and you just want to be put in the game? Then join our 100% free workshop, Secrets Behind Billion-Dollar Apparel Brands, and learn the strategies, tactics, and secrets used by the most successful companies in the world. We'll cover everything from setting your brand standards to big brand line planning and executive level processes. In this workshop, you're going to learn how to name your target customer, rationalize your line, calculate product margins, roll up your revenue, and see potential profits while figuring out how to build a unique calendar for your brand. You're going to learn that and so much more. Are you ready to take your apparel business to the next level? Sign up today and use code PODCAST for a 10% discount on the full Business of Apparel online course or any of our mini courses after the workshop. Visit www.thebusinessofapparel.com/secrets to register. Don't miss out. If they're going to say that your minimum order quantity is 200 units and you know that you can afford 500, gold. That's amazing. That's a yes. That's someone that you can put on your list that you know you can reach back out to. If they say your minimum order quantity is 600 units, you're really close. You might need to play with some numbers a little bit again, go back to your budgeting worksheet, see if you can afford the extra 100 units. Maybe you can't. Maybe that makes it a hard no. Maybe you've done a really great job with your budget and you know you cannot go over 500 units. Now you know you're looking for factories that can only do 500 unit MOQs or lower. This is a great indicator too when you talk to a factory and they say, hey, your MOQ needs to be 1,000 units, 1,200 units, 3,000 units, 10,000 units. There are a lot of factories who work with multi-million-dollar brands. And so they can say, my MOQ is 10,000 units to come work with us. You have to be a big company. You have to have a lot of capital to be able to invest in that purchase order. And so understanding those numbers up front and starting to have those conversations and using that as an indicator as to whether or not you can work with that factory can be really, really important. Real quick, on the flip side, I want you to also ask them what their full production capacity is. So not only what's your minimum order quantity, but as you grow, can they grow with you? So let's say you do get to a point where you can order 10,000 units of something or more. Can they handle that production capacity? Or are you going to have to switch factories or production facilities as you grow as a company? That's something to put in your business plan as well and to know upfront so that as you start to order more units, you start to make more profits, you start to see more gross revenue, you're able to make that pivot at the right time and start to involve a bigger production facility who can help you grow and expand and not just feel like you're pigeonholed to always hitting like a really small MOQ or a really small production capacity amount. Now, I mentioned MCQ a few times here, minimum color quantity. So this is the additional breakdown after your minimum order quantity. So for example, let's say your factory had told you that your minimum order quantity was 500 units, but you have to order at least 200 per color. So now in this case, if you divide 500 by 200, you realize that you can only order 2 colorways in that style. So the minimum order quantity is going to be at the style level. You will not have to worry about sizing usually. Most factories do not ask you to give a minimum per size. If they do, that's something you can try to negotiate because that's not typical. I want you to know that. So if someone is telling you you need to order 500 per style, 200 per color. Now you know that if you want to add a third colorway, you're going to have to actually order 600 units of that style, right? Because 200 per color times 3 colorways is 600 units. So you're going to have to exceed that minimum order quantity. Obviously, you're still within the parameters of what the factory can work with. But now you understand that if you want to have more colors, you're going to have to order more units. And sometimes that will depend also on the amount of fabric that you can actually bring in. So let's say, for example, your fabric mill is requiring you to order 1,000 yards of something, and that's going to make 1,000 units. Your factory might come back to you and say, we don't have a minimum order quantity or a minimum color quantity, but we will not allow you to hold fabric here longer than a single production run. So now your minimum order quantity and your minimum color quantity is actually dependent on your fabric mill. So let's say you use a yard of fabric per unit. And so you have 1,000 yards sitting in the warehouse at your factory ready to go for production. That means you're going to have to order 1,000 units of that color. So I want you to understand that there's a few different ways that you can understand MOQ information from your factory. Those few ways are normal. And so you're going to need to understand that as you're planning your budget. Okay, so that's what an MOQ is. Why do we have MOQs? Now, I mentioned this a little bit already. It's for quality control. It's also for cost savings. So as an entrepreneur, you probably notice that the more and more that you do a single task or the more and more that you do something, you get better at it. you get more efficient at it. You start to recognize where you can have little shortcuts or how you can do it a little bit better. And that's exactly what happens at your factory when you're able to order and produce more units at a time. So if they can make 3,000 units at a time, you're going to get little efficiencies. You're going to find little ways where they can actually make the garment better. They might be able to afford to make little tools or little templates so that when they're adding a heat transfer or they're putting your logo in a certain place, it's in the exact right spot every time. But they can't afford to do that if you don't order a ton of units. So it's for quality and it's for consistency and it's for costing. The more that you can send to a factory, the less your cost is going to be with them. And the reason for that is because at most factories, they have what we call modular sewing setups. And so they'll have a slew of sewing machines and different heat transfer machines and anything else you can imagine. And what they do when they get your garment, they get your tech pack and they're ready to send it into production, a production manager will say, okay, we need these 10 different machines set up in this exact order to be able to create this garment. And it might be completely different from anything else that they're doing on the floor. That's your sewing line. It's set up from point A to point Z in a way that is the most efficient for your garment to be sewn. When your production is done, they're going to take that line down. They're going to put the machines back in someone else's line, or they're going to put them back into storage, whatever it needs to be. So if you can make 3,000 units on a single line, and they don't have to be tearing down a production line after maybe just a week of sewing, that causes efficiencies for them. That's less man hours of setting up machinery, moving machinery around. And so all of a sudden you get cost savings on that. You're saving their man hours. You're doing less hours per week or less hours per day because they're not constantly setting up new lines for you and tearing down new lines for you. So that's one of the reasons why you actually see cost savings with the more units that you end up purchasing. So these are all of the great reasons why we have MOQs and why it's really important to have these conversations when you are interviewing factories or manufacturers to be able to become a partner for you, become the partner that you need in your production runs. Now, like I said before, most minimum order quantities don't go down to the size level. So you need to be able to determine your size breaks. Let's say you're offering small, medium, large. You know you need 20% to be smalls, 50% to be mediums, and 30% to be large. That's your target demographic. That's going to help you sell. That's the amount of inventory that you need. There shouldn't be a minimum on sizes. So you should just need to negotiate your MOQ at the style level and then at the color level. And those are the numbers that you need to understand. Okay, so I hope this was helpful. We get a ton of questions about minimum order quantities. This is really, really important for you to understand for your brand, to know your numbers up front, and then to use this metric as you do your budgeting year after year, season after season, because you don't ever want to order under MOQ. What happens if you order under MOQ is that you get surcharges. They'll typically say, if you can't order our minimum order quantity, we're going to charge you an extra 10%, an extra 20% per garment. And so that can add up really, really fast. You don't really want to do that. You would rather get into a factory that is going to be able to facilitate your needs up front. Ideally, one that can also grow with you and produce lots of units for you in the future. If you have any additional questions about this, I encourage you to leave a comment below. I am loving just connecting with this community, answering all of your questions and getting you all of the information that you need. If you like this episode, please leave us a review, like and subscribe here on YouTube. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'll see you next week. Thank you so much for listening to the Business of Apparel podcast. I would so appreciate hearing your thoughts on the show. And if you know someone who could benefit from it, please share it with them. My biggest desire is to help other apparel professionals understand the nuances of our industry so we can all work toward making better product for a better world. If you would like to connect further, I'd love to invite you to send me a message through my website, thebusinessofapparel.com, where I do weekly trainings through my YouTube video channel, a weekly newsletter, blog articles, and so many more resources to help you start and scale a profitable apparel brand. This podcast is produced by Box 7 Media, who I cannot speak highly enough of. If you're looking to start your own podcast, You can reach out to Jeremy at Box 7 Media on LinkedIn anytime.